I bought the tulips at 7:40 in the morning from a stand outside the train station, white ones, because Daniel always said red roses were what men gave when they had run out of ideas. The woman at the stand wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with a length of green twine, and she asked me if it was for someone special, and I said yes, my husband, 14 years. She smiled the way strangers smile at things that have lasted. I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket where the paper corner pressed against my ribs the whole drive into the city. Inside that envelope were 2 tickets to Lisbon, a Friday evening flight, 5 nights in a small hotel in Alfama with a rooftop that looked out over the river. It was the closest thing I could find to the place we had gone for our honeymoon, back when Daniel still owned 2 suits and both of them needed pressing. By 11 that same morning, I would watch him kiss another woman in front of 200 people and slide a ring onto her finger while the whole company applauded. By noon, I would own the wreckage of everything he thought was his. But at 7:40, I was just a wife with flowers, and I want to be honest about that, because the version of me who walked into that lobby believing in the surprise was a real person, and I do not want to pretend she never existed. The building was called Northbridge Tower, 31 floors of glass off the river in the Loop, and Northbridge Financial Systems occupied the top 9 of them. I did not go there often. That was by design, and for a long time I told myself it was my design. I liked my privacy. I liked working from the study at the back of our house in Lake Forest, where the light came in slantwise over the desk in the afternoons, and nobody needed anything from me except the dog. What I did not let myself notice was that somewhere over the years, my absence had stopped being a preference and started being a convenience, and not mine. The lobby had a living wall of ferns and a reception desk that looked more like the front of a boutique hotel than the entrance to a company that processed $40 billion in payments a year. The young man at the desk had a headset and an easy smile, and when I gave my name, he did not react to it at all. 14 years earlier, the whole company could have fit around a folding table. Now my own last name meant nothing to the person guarding the door. "Are you here for the celebration?" he asked. I felt something warm move through my chest, because of course. Daniel had planned a Valentine's thing for the staff. He was good at those. The champagne, the little speeches, the visible generosity that photographed well and cost him nothing he valued. I thought, he arranged a party and he did not tell me, and in a few minutes I am going to walk in with tulips and tickets to Lisbon, and he is going to look up and his face is going to do the thing it used to do. "I suppose I am," I said. He pointed me toward the atrium on the ground floor, a wide space under a skylight where the company held its all-hands meetings. "They're just getting started," he said, and went back to his screen. I heard the sound before I understood it. Applause, and under the applause a single violin, and under the violin, the particular hum of a lot of people holding their phones up to record the same thing. I came around the corner into the atrium, and there were maybe 200 of them gathered in a loose horseshoe around a low platform strung with white flowers and pale gold balloons. The company logo glowed on the wall behind the stage. And on the stage, in a charcoal suit I did not recognize because I had not bought it for him, stood my husband. Beside him stood Sloan Whitmore. I had met her exactly once, 11 months earlier, at a foundation dinner where she had spoken for 4 minutes about payment rails in emerging markets, and made it sound like poetry. Daniel had hired her as CEO a year and a half before, which had seemed reasonable at the time, a founder stepping back to let a professional operator run the day-to-day. She was 38 to my 47, with dark hair cut sharp at the jaw and the specific stillness of a person who has never once had to raise her voice to be heard. She was not the villain I would have written if I had been allowed to choose. She was better than that, which somehow made it worse. Daniel took her hand, and then, while the violin held one long note, he went down onto one knee. For a full second, my mind refused to accept the picture my eyes were sending it. I actually thought it might be some corporate morale stunt, a fake proposal to launch a product. I have replayed that second many times since. There is a particular cruelty in the moment your brain works so hard to protect you from a truth that the whole room already knows. He opened a small box. The ring caught the light from the skylight, a cushion cut, the exact cut I had described to him in a jewelry store in Florence years ago while he pretended to be bored. Sloan pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes filled. She nodded, and the room came apart into cheering, and Daniel stood and took her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a nervous kiss. It was not the fumbling of a man in over his head. It was practiced. A man does not kiss a woman that way in front of 200 colleagues unless he has already rehearsed leaving his wife 1,000 times in his mind and found that he could live with it. A woman near me, someone from a department I would never know the name of, leaned to her friend and whispered, "They're so perfect together, honestly. Perfect." That was the word that made him turn. His eyes found me across the atrium, over the heads of his cheering staff, past the balloons and the violin. I watched the color leave his face. I watched the wide public smile fall off him like something unclipped. He knew I had seen all of it, the knee, the ring, the kiss. And here's the part I keep coming back to, the part that told me everything. He did not move. He did not say my name. He did not step off that platform and cross the floor to me. He just stood there, holding another woman's face, and let the distance between us do the thing distance does. Sloane felt his attention shift and followed it to me. She looked at me with the mild, patient confusion of a host trying to place a guest. Then, and I will never forget the gentleness of it, she mouthed the words across the room. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" That was the moment I understood what Daniel had actually done. He had not just cheated. Cheating would have been a smaller thing, a thing with a shape. He had erased me. He had built a world at the top of that tower in which his wife of 14 years was not a person the CEO would even recognize. I turned around before my face could betray me in front of strangers. Nobody stopped me. The young man at the reception desk looked up as I passed and smiled again and said, "Have a great Valentine's Day." And I said thank you, because apparently even ruin has manners. I made it to the parking garage before my hands began to shake. I sat in the car with the tulips on the passenger seat and the Lisbon envelope in my lap, and I listened to the faint applause still ringing somewhere behind my eyes. I could have screamed. I could have gone back up in that elevator and thrown the flowers at him in front of all of them and given the whole atrium the scene they were already half enjoying. Part of me wanted that more than I have ever wanted anything. But there is a kind of rage that arrives loud, and there is a kind that arrives so clean it goes quiet. Mine went quiet. I have learned since then that the quiet kind is the one you should be afraid of. I picked up my phone. I did not call Daniel. I opened the airline app and canceled Lisbon, both seats, and I did not let myself feel it. Then I called the private banking line and I asked them to freeze every account that carried a joint hold or a trust co-signature, effective immediately, and the woman on the line asked me twice if I was certain, and both times I said yes. Then I called Ruth. Ruth Callahan had been my mother's attorney before she was mine, and she answered on the second ring because Ruth always answers on the second ring, and she heard something in my voice before I said a full sentence. "Vivian, what happened?" "My husband just got engaged to the CEO of my company," I said. In front of the whole staff, there was a violin. The silence on her end was total. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "I'm coming to the tower." "No," I said. "Don't come here. Start with the trust." Another silence, longer. Ruth has known me since I was 19, and she knows exactly what that sentence costs, because she is the one who built the structure it refers to. "You understand what pulling the trust position does," she said carefully. "It triggers a capital event. It will freeze their credit facility. It very likely kills the acquisition they've been chasing since October." I looked through the windshield at the elevator bank on the far wall of the garage, half expecting Daniel to come bursting out of it, breathless, sorry. He did not. He was still upstairs, I imagined, being congratulated. "Withdraw the full position," I said. "All 79%. Today." "Vivian." "Do it, Ruth." By the time I merged onto the expressway heading north, my phone had begun to ring, and it did not really stop. One call, then two, then a screen full of them, Daniel and numbers I did not know, and Northbridge extensions, and finally Ruth again with a single text. "It's done. Board is convening. Do not talk to Daniel about the company. Anything you say to him is discoverable." By the time I turned onto our street in Lake Forest, my phone showed 152 missed calls. I let myself into the house and stood in the front hall with my coat still on and my purse still on my shoulder, and the tulips hanging upside down from my hand where I had forgotten I was carrying them. Otis, our old lab, gray around the muzzle now and slow to rise, came out of the kitchen and pressed his head into my knee, and I stood there and let him, and I did not cry, and I have wondered since whether that was strength or shock. I think it was probably shock wearing strength's coat. Then the doorbell rang. I did not answer it. I knew who it was. I stood in the hall and looked through the narrow window beside the door, and there he was on the porch, still in the charcoal suit, his tie loose now, his hair pushed around by his own hands. Behind him, his car sat at an angle in the driveway where he had left it, one wheel up on the grass, the door not quite shut. For the first time all day, Daniel looked like a man who had understood that consequences can move faster than apologies. He rang again, longer. "Vivian," he called through the door. "Please, open the door. Let me explain." I opened it, but only halfway. His eyes went to my face, then down to my coat, then past me toward the kitchen where he could probably see the counter, and I watched him do the math on what I had walked in carrying. "Vivian," he said, very low. It wasn't what it looked like. "I want you to understand that even then, standing on my porch after what I had watched him do, he thought the problem was the looking. He thought if he could just adjust the angle I had seen it from, the whole thing would resolve." "Then tell me," I said. My voice came out level, which surprised me. "What exactly did it look like?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Behind him, his phone started to ring again, and he looked down at it out of pure reflex, and whatever name he saw on the screen drained the last of the color from his face. It was not my name this time. His own phone was turning against him now. He silenced it without answering and looked back up at me. "We need to talk inside," he said. "No," I said. His eyes flicked to the street, to the bare February trees, to the neighbors' houses where the porch lights were already coming on against the gray afternoon. Lake Forest is a place where people are very good at not appearing to notice things while noticing everything, and Daniel knew that better than anyone. He had spent years building the picture of himself as the good husband, the generous founder, the man who remembered your birthday and sent a fruit basket when your mother was sick. Standing on his own porch begging did not fit the picture. I watched him become aware of that, and I watched him decide it did not matter, and I understood that the deciding was for my benefit, a performance of desperation because desperation was the tool he had left. "I made a mistake," he said. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I said. "You proposed to another woman in a building full of people who work for me." His jaw tightened at that last part, at the word me. "It got away from me," he said. That was Daniel's gift, and I think in the end it was the thing that ruined him. He could turn any choice into weather, a thing that rolled in, a front that moved through, never a decision made by a person with hands. "When did it get away from you?" I asked. "Before you rented the ring, or after?" He didn't answer. His phone was buzzing again in his pocket. He turned the screen against his leg so I couldn't see it, but I had already seen enough of the earlier one, and I knew the shape of what was happening 31 floors up in the city he had left burning behind him. The board had found out about the trust. The founder was on the phone to lawyers. Somewhere Sloan Whitmore was sitting in an office she had walked into that morning, believing was hers, learning what she had actually agreed to marry into. "What did you do?" Daniel said quietly. It was not really a question. "Vivian, what did you do?" I leaned against the door frame, and for the first time since I had come around that corner into the atrium, my hands were completely still. "I protected what belongs to me," I said. I watched the panic in his face resolve into something older and colder, a look I had seen across dinner tables and, in the early years, across a folding desk. Calculation. The particular focus that came over him whenever a deal started moving in a direction he could no longer steer. "You can't just pull capital like that," he said. "There are procedures. There are obligations." "There are clauses," I said. "And you signed all of them." He stared at me the way you stare at a language you used to speak and let go rusty. 14 years ago, when Northbridge was a payments concept sketched on the back of a bank statement at 2 a.m, Daniel had not talked about clauses. He had talked about the thing we were going to build, a rail that could move money for people the big banks would not touch, small businesses, people sending wages home across borders, clinics in places the wires never reached. He had the voice and I had the architecture. He could stand up in a room and make 40 strangers believe, and I could go home and actually make the thing he had promised them exist. We were good once. That is the part nobody tells you about betrayal, that it does not always start with a villain. Sometimes it starts with two tired people sitting on the floor of a rented office, splitting a carton of cold noodles because the heat had gone out again, laughing about it. Sure, they were building something that would matter. My mother had put in the first real money. Not because she trusted Daniel, she never fully did, but because she trusted me. When she died, her stake moved into the Hale Family Trust, and over the years, through funding rounds and buybacks and a merger with a company I had architected before I ever met him, the structure Ruth built came to hold 79% of Northbridge Financial Systems. Daniel knew this. He had known it when he asked me to stay out of the public role because, as he put it so reasonably, investors like a single clear voice. He had known it when he convinced me my privacy was a strategic asset, that I could shape the company from the board while he handled the magazines and the stages. He had known it every single time a reporter called him the founder, and I had corrected no one, because I told myself a marriage is not a contest for credit. Knowing a fact and respecting it turned out to be very different things. "You're upset," he said, softening his voice the way he did in negotiations. "You have every right to be upset." "No," I said. "I had every right to know my husband was living as an unmarried man at work." Something crossed his face, and he grabbed for it. "Sloan didn't know," he said quickly. "About us. She didn't know." I kept my face still, though it landed harder than I let him see. "She didn't know what?" "That we were, that it was." He stopped. "I told her we'd been separated for 2 years." The cold that went through me then was clean and exact. I thought of Sloane's face across the atrium, the way she had mouthed, "Do we know each other?" Not cruelly, not smugly, just genuinely, blankly unaware that the woman standing there with a bunch of white tulips was the wife of the man whose ring she was wearing. "You told her we were separated," I said, "while you slept in our bed, while you hosted my aunt at Thanksgiving, while we signed the lake house refinance together in November." My voice did not rise. "While you kissed me goodbye this morning." His eyes closed for a moment. When they opened, the man I had married was there for one instant, the one who used to hate letting me down, and then he was gone again under the fear, and I understood that I would probably never see that first man again, that he had maybe been gone for years, and I had been talking to a very good copy. "The board is overreacting," he said. "This can be managed." There it was, not repaired, not undone, managed. I reached back to the console table in the hall and picked up the black envelope, the Lisbon envelope, which I had carried in from the car without thinking. I held it between 2 fingers where he could see it. "These were for you," I said. 5 nights in Alfama. I thought you'd been distant because of the acquisition. I thought it was stress. I thought it was the thing you always said it was, temporary." Grief moved across his face, and it arrived far too late to matter. "It was complicated," he said. "Software is complicated," I said. "Marriage is hard. Lying is simple. You just kept choosing it." My phone buzzed. A message from Ruth. "Emergency board meeting, 7:30 tonight. They want you by video. Say nothing to Daniel." I turned the screen toward him for 1 second, long enough for him to read the first line, and I watched his mouth come open. "Vivian, don't do this tonight," he said. "I didn't do anything tonight," I said. "You did all of it. I'm just the last one to find out." He ran both hands through his hair, and for a moment he did not look distinguished or founding or any of the words the magazines used. He looked 49 and cornered and tired. "If they push me out, the whole thing wobbles," he said. "People lose jobs. Good people. People with mortgages." "That's the first true thing you've said today," I told him. "And it should have crossed your mind before you turned their workplace into your engagement party." He had nothing. For years, Daniel had survived on motion. When a conversation got uncomfortable, he walked into another room. When a question got too precise, he took a call. When I asked him why the house felt so empty, he blamed a deadline. But now he was standing still on a porch with nowhere to walk, and the life he had so carefully divided into separate sealed rooms had all at once become one house with the doors flung open. "Does Sloan know now?" I asked. "That you lied to her too?" His silence answered. "Then go explain it to her," I said, and I started to close the door. He put out his hand, not touching me, but close, and I saw it was trembling. "Are you divorcing me?" The word should have felt enormous. Instead, it felt clerical, like naming a document that had already been drafted, page by page, over years of small, quiet humiliations I had chosen not to add up. "Yes," I said. His face broke, and then the fear took it back. "And the company?" I looked at him through the narrowing gap. "The company," I said, "was never yours. Was—" I closed the door and turned the lock. He knocked once, then again, then he stopped. A minute later, I heard his car door. Through the side window, I watched him sit behind the wheel without starting the engine, shoulders down, phone against his ear, talking to someone. Sloan, maybe. The board. A lawyer. For 14 years, I would have needed to know which. Standing in my own front hall with the dog leaning warm against my leg, I found that I did not need to know at all. At 7:30, I sat at the kitchen table in a plain gray sweater with a glass of water and my laptop open, and one by one the directors of Northbridge Financial Systems appeared on the screen, each of them looking careful and stunned and professionally afraid. Ruth sat beside me, out of frame, a legal pad in front of her. Then Daniel appeared, no longer on my porch. He was in his office at the tower, the Chicago skyline burning behind him through the glass, and above his head hung the framed magazine cover that had called him the man rebuilding money for the rest of us. His camera came on. He looked straight into it, straight at me, and I watched every person on that call understand at the same moment that the woman they had treated as a footnote to Daniel Hale's story was the only reason any of them still had a company to try to save. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Peter Ostrander, who had been on the board for 6 years and had, to my certain knowledge, never once addressed a word to me, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. No small talk. Nobody mentioned the holiday. "We've received formal notice," he began, choosing each word like it might be entered into evidence, which it might, "that the Hale Family Trust has withdrawn its equity commitment and suspended all discretionary capital support, effective immediately." He paused. "Mrs. Hale, can you confirm that notice is authentic?" Every face on the grid turned toward me. "Yes," I said. "And can you confirm that the Hale Family Trust remains the beneficial owner of 79% of Northbridge Financial Systems?" "Yes." The silence stretched. Several of them had known the ownership on paper. But paper and reality are not the same animal, and for years the reality in that building had been Daniel. His face on the wall, his name in the trade press, his voice in every all hands. Somewhere along the line, visibility had quietly been mistaken for ownership. Daniel had believed it most of all. He leaned toward his camera. "Vivian, please don't make a permanent decision out of one bad afternoon." Ruth's hand came down gently on my legal pad, a reminder to stay off the emotional line. "I didn't make a decision today," I said. "I exercised rights that have existed for 11 years. Ostrander turned on screen toward Daniel. "Daniel, is there anything you need to disclose to this board before we go further?" A long pause, then flatly, "My personal situation has become complicated." "Complicated," repeated a director named Lena Fisk, in a tone that could have frozen the river. Another board member folded her hands. "Did you represent yourself, inside this company, as an unmarried man?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." "Were you in fact married?" "Yes." "Did the executive team know you were married?" "No." The quiet after that was a different quality of quiet. I understood something watching their faces. Not one of them cared, in that room, that Daniel had been unfaithful to me. What they cared about was that the chief executive of a regulated financial company had concealed a material personal fact while conducting a highly visible relationship with another officer of that same company. What had walked in the door as heartbreak was walking out as a governance problem, and governance problems have lawyers. The general counsel spoke for the first time. "Given these disclosures and pending the capital situation, I'd recommend placing Mr. Hale on immediate administrative leave while we conduct an independent review." Daniel looked into the lens. "You cannot be serious." Ostrander removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I very much wish I weren't." By 8:30, the news had not reached a single reporter, but inside the tower everyone already knew, because company rumors travel faster than any statement a company can issue. Someone saw Daniel carrying a box out of the executive floor. Someone noticed Sloan Whitmore's office door stayed shut. Security deactivated a key card. The photo from the atrium, the knee, the ring, the kiss, moved through private group chats within the hour, and to the credit of 200 frightened people, not one of them posted it anywhere public. Not yet. I slept about 3 hours. For the first time in a very long time, the bed had one person in it, and the strangeness of that was not loneliness exactly, just a quiet I had no habit for. In the morning, I made coffee and fed Otis and stood at the kitchen window watching 2 kids at the corner wait for the school bus, stamping their feet against the cold, laughing at something on a phone. The world outside had not ended. Mine had come apart in a single morning, and theirs had not moved an inch, and I found that steadying rather than cruel. Ruth came at 9 with 2 thick folders and a face I did not like. The banks responded overnight, she said. They've suspended the acquisition financing, which we expected, and they're asking whether the trust intends to stay invested at all after a restructuring. I did not open the folders. What did you tell them? She almost smiled. The truth. That the owner still believes in the company, that she never wanted to burn it down. She looked at me over her glasses. You didn't, Vivian. You wanted to stop one man from acting like he built something he only ever narrated. Those are different fires. Around noon, my phone lit with a name I did not expect. Sloan Whitmore. I looked at it for a long time before I answered. Hello. Her voice was nothing like the 4 polished minutes I had heard at that foundation dinner. It was low and careful and a little wrecked. I know I probably have no right to call you, she said. You probably don't, I said. She took that without flinching, which I noted. I didn't know, she said. I need you to hear me say it. I did not know you existed the way you exist. He told me you'd been separated for 2 years. He said the divorce was slow because of business assets. He showed me a lease. That last word stopped me. What lease? A silence. Then, an apartment. Downtown in River North. He said it was where he'd been living since the split. He took me there. There were his clothes in the closet. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Daniel had rented a second apartment. Not to live in, because he lived in our house, in our bed, and had eaten dinner across from me the night before all of this. He had rented it to furnish a lie, hung his own shirts in a closet he never slept near, so that on the nights he told me he was working late, there would be somewhere to stand that made the story true. Every late meeting, every strategy session that ran past midnight, every trip that ended too late to drive home. There had always been another place. Not because he needed a second life, because he needed evidence of a first one that was not the one I was in. I feel sick, Sloan said. You should, I said, and I meant it plainly, without any pleasure in it. She was crying now, quietly, trying to hide it. I'm so sorry. If I had known, I never would have. Never. For the first time since the atrium, I heard something in a voice connected to this whole disaster that I actually believed. I think you're telling the truth, I said, but being sorry doesn't unhappen it. No, she said, it doesn't. I looked out at the frozen flower beds along the back fence, where in a few weeks something green would push up through the ice whether any of us deserved a spring or not. I don't know you well enough to forgive you, I said. That's the honest answer. That's fair, she said, and she did not argue for anything more, and I respected her a little for that, which I had not expected to feel and did not entirely want to. Late that afternoon, Ruth called, and her tone had changed again. We found something, she said. Come to the office. The forensic firm she had brought in had set up in a locked conference room in Ruth's building, blinds down, laptops open next to bankers' boxes of old authorizations and expense files and board packets. I stayed away from the tower on purpose. If I walked in there too soon, the whole review would collapse into a story about a scorned wife hunting her husband, and I wanted no part of that story. I wanted paper. Daniel had always underestimated paper, because paper does not get tired and it does not get charmed. On the conference table, they had laid out a spread of documents, and at the center of them was a company I had never heard of. Halcyon Advisory Partners, LLC, a consulting entity that had, over the past 4 years, invoiced Northbridge Financial Systems just over $9 million for strategic advisory services, market analysis, and integration consulting. We couldn't find the work product, the lead analyst said. Her name was Priya Nair, and she spoke the way a surgeon reads a chart, without a single wasted word. There are no decks, no models, no deliverables tied to the invoices, so we followed the entity instead of the money. She slid a filing across the table. Halcyon Advisory is a Delaware LLC. The registered manager, 2 layers down through a nominee, is your husband. I looked at the name on the page. Daniel had been invoicing his own company through a shell he controlled and paying the invoices and signing the approvals, and the money had gone into an account with his hand on it. $9 million, routed in a slow, careful trickle small enough that no single line ever screamed. There's more, Priya said. Option grants. 3 tranches over 2 years, backdated to price them at market lows. Some to himself, some to 2 vice presidents who happened to be college friends of his and who approved the Halcyon invoices. She laid the grants out in a row. And these vendor contracts. A cloud reseller, a marketing firm, a facilities company. All of them route back, one way or another, to people in his personal circle, at rates well above market. I sat down. Until that moment, I had believed the story was about a marriage. A man who fell for a younger woman, lied badly, got caught spectacularly. Ugly, but human-sized. What was on that table was not human-sized. It was a system. It had been running for years, quietly, underneath the marriage, underneath the magazine covers, underneath every dinner where I asked him how his day had gone, and he said fine, long, and reached for the wine. Emma, Ruth caught herself, used my name. Vivian, you need to understand what this becomes if the review confirms it. Tell me. She looked at Priya, then back at me. This isn't a divorce anymore. This is misconduct, possibly fraud. Potentially something a U.S. attorney would want to see. I looked at the rows of paper with Daniel's fingerprints all over them, and the feeling that came was not triumph. It was closer to vertigo, because I finally understood that Valentine's Day had not created any of this. Valentine's Day had only pulled back the one curtain I could see from where I stood. Behind it, the room had been full for years, and I had been living beside it, sleeping beside it, signing our joint tax returns beside it, and I had never once heard the machinery running. Then finish it, I said. All of it. Follow every dollar. The next 2 days moved with the cold precision of a thing that no longer needed me to push it. The forensic team worked inside the locked room. I stayed home and answered questions through Ruth and let the professionals do the work Daniel had spent 14 years betting no one would ever bother to do. By the 3rd day, they had the shape of it whole. It was not one bad decision or a handful of gray area expenses. It was a practice. Halcyon had been paid on a schedule. The option grants had a pattern to their backdating that no accident produces. The vendor relationships formed a small closed circle of people who owed Daniel something and were being repaid with money that was not his to give. None of it, on its own, was reckless enough to trip an alarm. That was exactly what made it dangerous. It was patient. It was dressed in clean corporate language, wrapped in enough legitimate paperwork to pass through busy hands without a second look. But documents age badly. Every invoice carried a date. Every approval carried metadata. Every wire left a trail through a system that Daniel himself had helped design, which I found I could almost laugh at, that the rail he had built to move money honestly for people who had none had been quietly repurposed to move it dishonestly for the one man who had plenty. At 6:12 on Thursday evening, Ruth called me. I was in the laundry room, folding one of Daniel's white shirts, because habit is sometimes the very last part of love to die, and I looked down at the monogram on the cuff and felt foolish for the softness in my own hands. "We have enough," Ruth said, "for the board, for a civil claim, and enough that we'll be obligated to refer it." I set the shirt down on top of the dryer and did not pick it up again. "Then send it," I said. The second emergency board meeting was not one Daniel was invited to attend as chief executive. He was invited as its subject. Sloane appeared on the call from her own office, pale, composed, no ring on her hand. She had recused herself from every decision touching Daniel, and the board had accepted the recusal, and she did not try to defend herself, and she did not point at me. When Ostrander asked whether she had known Daniel was married, she answered clearly, "No. He told me they had been separated for 2 years." "And did he ever disclose to you that Mrs. Hale controls a majority of this company?" Sloane looked down for a moment. "No. He told me his wife had no operational role and that the ownership was, his words, old family paperwork that didn't affect anything." Old family paperwork. That was what Daniel had reduced my mother's money and my architecture and my years of chosen silence down to in a bed he shared with someone else, a stack of paperwork that did not affect anything. Then Priya Nair walked the board through it. She did not raise her voice once. She did not need to. She showed the invoices with no work behind them. She showed Halcyon Advisory and the nominee layers and the name at the bottom. She showed the backdated grants and the closed circle of vendors. She showed the River North apartment, expense to the company for 2 years as a client hospitality suite. She showed a jewelry purchase, over $40,000, booked as an investor relations expense, and I understood, watching Sloane's face, that Sloane was doing the same math I was and arriving at the same ring. Sloane put a hand over her mouth. Once, only once. Daniel sat frozen in his frame. When he finally spoke, his voice came out thin. "This is all being taken out of context." Priya adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Hale, metadata doesn't have context. It has timestamps." Nobody laughed. I almost did. He tried again. "I had authority to act on behalf of the company." "You had operational authority," Priya said. "You did not have authority to route company funds to an entity you secretly controlled." His eyes came to me then, and for the first time all week, there was something under the fear that was not fear. It was anger. "You're enjoying this," he said. I felt every face on that grid turn toward me. I could have denied it. Instead, I told the truth as carefully as I knew how. "No, Daniel," I said. "I'm not enjoying it. I'm surviving it." That closed his mouth. By noon, the board voted, without a single dissent, to terminate Daniel Hale for cause, to claw back every unvested share, and to refer the forensic findings to outside counsel for civil recovery and to the relevant authorities. His name would come down off the company materials. Sloane remained on leave pending the completion of her own ethics review, though the early findings were already clear that she had been deceived rather than complicit. There was no shouting. Nobody threw a glass. The whole thing happened in signatures and votes and locked accounts, and somehow that made it feel more finished than any scene I could have made on that platform with a bunch of tulips. Sloane asked to meet me in person a few days later. I almost said no. Then I thought about her face when she learned about the apartment, and I decided there was one conversation left in this whole wreck that Daniel did not get to script. We met at a coffee shop in Evanston, far from anyone who might know either of us. She was there first. No makeup, or very little. The ring was gone, and the space where it had been on her hand looked strange and raw, the way a wall looks after you take down a picture that hung there a long time. "I'm sorry," she said, standing when I reached the table. "You already told me that." "I know. I needed to say it looking at you." I studied her and found none of the woman from the platform, none of the poise from the foundation dinner, just a person standing in a wreckage she had not built, holding a piece of it she had not known she was holding. "He made me feel chosen," she said, and looked down at her hands. "I know that's not an excuse. It's just what happened. He had this way of making you feel like the whole room had rearranged itself so you'd be at the center of it." I knew exactly the way she meant, because I had stood at that center once, years ago, on a bridge in Florence, with a man who described a ring I would not see again for 14 years, this time on someone else's hand. "When I saw you in the atrium," she said, "I thought you were an investor's wife, someone from a foundation board. I had no idea I was looking at the person whose life I was standing in the middle of." For a while, neither of us said anything. "He lied to both of us," I said finally. "But he married me first. His first duty was to me. That's not something you and I have to negotiate." She nodded, her eyes filling. I could have hated her, and part of me had wanted to, because hatred is simpler than the truth. The truth is that the other woman is not always a monster. Sometimes she is just another person standing in the same wreckage, holding a different piece of the same lie, wondering how she never heard the machinery either. I won't shield you from consequences, I said. The ethics review runs its course. I'm not asking you to shield me, but I'm not going to punish you for the parts that were only his. I picked up my coffee. That's not forgiveness, I want to be clear, but it's the closest thing to justice I have for you. She said thank you quietly, and we did not become friends, and I did not expect us to. Here is the part people always want, and the part I will not pretend went the way stories usually go. Daniel came back to the house one more time, about 2 weeks later. He did not lean on the bell. He knocked once and waited, and through the window I saw a man who looked nothing like the one I had gone to surprise with tulips. His coat was creased. He had not shaved. The confidence had drained out of him, and without it, he looked smaller and somehow younger and much more ordinary, and I felt no satisfaction in that, only a distant, sad recognition, the way you might feel seeing a building you once lived in with the windows dark. I opened the door with the chain on. He looked at the chain. I deserve that. Yes, I said. I lost everything. He said it like it was information he thought I might not have. You lost the illusion that it was ever yours to keep, I said. He nodded slowly. And then, because Daniel had never once in 14 years walked into a room without an angle, he tried the last one he had. We could still work something out, he said. About the company, about the referral. You have leverage, I know you do. We could sit down, the two of us, before this goes any further, and figure out what's best for both of us. He wet his lips. For the people who work there, for the family we were going to be. There it was. Even now, standing on my porch, unshaven, with a federal referral moving somewhere out of his reach, he was negotiating. He was not sorry. He had never once, in all of this, said a sentence that put my hurt ahead of his loss. He had grieved the company. He had grieved the magazine covers. He had grieved the version of his future that had another woman in it. He had not for one single second grieved me. There's nothing to work out, I said. The referral isn't mine to pull, and I wouldn't if it were. His face did the thing I had watched it do across conference tables for years, hardening as the charm failed and left only the appetite underneath. After everything I built, he started. You didn't build it, I said. You sold it. There's a difference, and you spent 14 years hoping I'd never make you learn it. He said my name. I did not answer it. I closed the door gently, not in anger, and I turned the lock, and through the side window I watched him stand on the porch a while longer, waiting for me to reopen it and make his future softer for him one last time, the way I had made it softer 1,000 times before. I did not. Eventually he walked back to his car with his hands in his pockets, and he did not look back, and I understood that whatever came for him next, prosecution or ruin, or just a long, slow slide into a smaller life, he was going to meet it as exactly the man he had chosen to be. There would be no letter from a quiet town somewhere, no season of growth, no earned second act. He had been offered the truth over and over for years and had picked the angle every time. Some people do not become new, they just get seen at last. Otis came into the hall and leaned against my leg, and I put my hand on his gray head and stood there in the quiet a long time, and it was, I noticed, a good quiet. Not the frozen quiet of shock from that first afternoon, a quiet with room in it. The divorce took months, the way real divorces do, full of disclosures and evaluations and depositions and more paper than either of us would have believed. Because of the trust and the way Ruth and my mother had built it 11 years before any of this, the ownership question was never in doubt. Daniel could not contest what he had spent years pretending did not affect anything. The civil claims from the forged web of Halcyon and the vendors ran on their own track and resolved into restitution, clawbacks, and a permanent bar on his serving as an officer or director of any company touched by the agreements involved. The referral ran on a track further still, out of my hands, exactly where I wanted it. Justice, I learned, does not arrive all at once, and it does not arrive loud. It arrives in numbered pages, on a schedule, indifferent to how much you cried the night before. Sloane finished her ethics review. The independent findings were clean. She had participated in nothing, benefited from nothing, and her only real failure had been believing a man who was very, very good at being believed. The board offered to reinstate her. She turned it down. She called me before she made the decision public, which she did not have to do. "I can't run it," she said. "Not this one. Every hallway has him in it for me, and I think, if I'm honest, every hallway has you in it too, and I can't ask 200 people to work under someone who's carrying what I'm carrying about their owner." I did not talk her out of it. I think she was right. Some rooms you have to leave to become anyone new, and unlike Daniel, she actually wanted to. The board asked me if I would take the CEO role myself. For years that had been the obvious ending, the reveal. The owner steps out of the shadows and onto the stage. And I sat with it, and I found that the stage had never been the thing I wanted. What I had wanted, all the way back to the folding desk and the cold noodles, was to build the rail and see it carry money to people the banks would not touch. I did not need my face on a wall to do that. I had let one man teach me that ownership and credit were the same currency, and they are not. I promoted our chief operating officer, a woman named Grace Okafor, who had run the actual machinery of the company for 6 years, while other people gave the speeches, and I took the role of executive chair, hands on the strategy, out of the spotlight, which is the arrangement I should have chosen a decade ago. Not because I could not have stood on the stage, because standing on it was never who I was, and I had spent 14 years letting someone else define me by my absence from it. 3 months after Valentine's Day, I found the black envelope in the back of a desk drawer, the Lisbon tickets long since canceled, the little handwritten card still folded inside. I read it once. Then I ran it through the shredder, not out of anger, out of something closer to release, and I opened my laptop and booked the trip again. Same city, different hotel, one seat. Lisbon met me with warm light off the water and steep streets full of the sound of trams. I walked with no plan. I sat outside cafes in Alfama and let coffee go cold in front of me because I was too busy watching people to drink it. On my second evening, I stood on a terrace above the river as the whole city turned gold, the exact color of those balloons in the atrium, though I did not think about the atrium for very long. Years ago, on a bridge in another country, a man had made me a promise about a future. Standing over the Tagus by myself, I made one promise, and I made it only to me. I would never again confuse being needed with being valued. They had never once been the same thing, and I had spent half my life treating them like they were. Nearly a year later, Northbridge announced a fund to back early-stage payment companies founded by women, and by people the venture world routinely overlooked, the exact idea I had been carrying in a notebook since before I ever met Daniel. At the launch, Grace ran the room, and near the end she said a thing I had not asked her to say. "Some people build companies," she said, "and some people build companies where the truth eventually outweighs the appearance. We're standing here because Vivian Hale refused to trade one for the other." The applause that followed sounded nothing like the applause under the skylight a year before. That applause had been for an illusion. This was for something real, and I have learned to hear the difference. And the difference is the whole point. People sometimes ask me whether the revenge felt good. The honest answer is that revenge is the wrong word for what happened, and it did not feel like anything so simple as good. Pulling the trust felt like breathing after holding my breath for years without noticing I was doing it. The board vote felt like a locked door finally staying locked. But peace did not come from any of it. Peace came later, and separately, on a terrace over a river with 1 cup of cold coffee, the day I stopped measuring my own worth by whether the man on the stage remembered I was in the room. Daniel lost his marriage because he chose the lie every single time it was offered to him. He lost the company because he mistook the microphone for the thing it was pointed at. He is somewhere now, smaller, and I do not track where, and that indifference is the closest thing to freedom I know. As for me, I did not win because he lost. I want to be very clear about that, because it is the only thing in this whole story I am certain of. I won because somewhere in the wreckage of a Valentine's morning, I finally remembered that my worth had never once depended on his permission to see it. If this story stayed with you, I would like to know what you would have done standing in that atrium with those flowers in your hand. Would you have walked out quietly the way I did? Or would you have burned it down where everyone could watch? Tell me in the comments. And if you find yourself drawn to stories about betrayal, quiet justice, and the moment a person finally stops asking to be chosen, subscribe and stay with us, because the next one is already waiting.